Welcome. Today we're taking an extensive look at the source material surrounding one of the most chilling and, frankly, complex criminal cases from the 1990s. We're talking about the horrific trajectory of Debora Green.
Yes, she was a respected American physician, and her life story just, well, it goes completely off the rails, leading to her eventual conviction for murder and aggravated arson in Prairie Village, Kansas.
And the amount of material we have to work through here is pretty substantial.
It is. We have a comprehensive stack of documentation here. It tracks everything from Green's biography, the agonizing timeline of the crimes, which include systematic poisoning and a fatal house fire.
And then there's the forensic side.
Exactly. The meticulous forensic investigation that uncovered the use of ricin, the whole legal process, and then, of course, the various psychological evaluations that tried to make sense of it all.
Our commitment here is to provide a thorough and clear understanding of this evidence and to do it impartially.
And with compassion. I think
Yeah.
it's critical as we go through this that we maintain compassion, especially for the victims.
Absolutely. The focus has to remain squarely on them, particularly her children, Timothy and Kelly.
The sources really lay bare a narrative of domestic strife that didn't just end in a typical messy divorce. It ended in, well, a profound and calculated tragedy.
So the objective for you, the listener, is to really grasp this complex sequence of events.
Right. To understand how chronic domestic conflict could escalate, how it could progress into months of secret chronic poisoning, and then ultimately culminate in a devastating house fire.
A fire that claimed the lives of her two youngest children.
It's the story of a professional, a doctor, using her sophisticated knowledge for just the most destructive ends imaginable.
So to set the stage, let's start with the basic chronology. Deborah Jones, who later became Debora Green, was a physician.
And she married Michael Farrar, also a physician, in 1979. So on the surface, you have this image of incredible professional success.
A medical power couple.
Exactly. But the sources show that by the mid-1990s, the marriage was deteriorating and quite rapidly. Farrar officially filed for divorce in July of 1995.
And that period, that summer and autumn of 95, is really the flashpoint, isn't it?
It's everything. That time frame from July to October 1995, it directly correlates with Michael Farrar's severe, mysterious health crisis, an illness that, his own colleagues, other doctors, just couldn't explain.
And that sequence tragically concluded with the house fire on October 24th, 1995.
A fire that killed 13-year-old Timothy and 6-year-old Kelly.
Before all the tragedy, Debora Green's life appeared to be, well, a model of success. And I think that contrast is absolutely critical to understanding the eventual breakdown.
It is. Let's start at the beginning. She was born in Havana, Illinois in 1951, and the sources, they consistently emphasize her remarkable intellectual promise.
It seems like she was truly exceptional, even from a very young age.
Oh, absolutely. Reportedly, she taught herself to read and write before she was even 3 years old. Yeah. And she just consistently demonstrated this high academic achievement throughout her childhood. She became a National Merit Scholar. She graduated as co-valedictorian of her high school class.
So the people who knew her then, they must have had enormous expectations for her.
They did. The material describes her as someone destined for great success. No one could have predicted this outcome.
So we have this foundation of, just powerful intelligence. She enters the University of Illinois in 1969. And at first, she's majoring in chemistry. The plan was chemical engineering.
Right, but she later shifted her focus. After graduating in 1972, she decides to pursue medicine. And the sources say this was partly motivated by a belief that the engineering market was becoming saturated at the time.
A very practical decision.
Very. She graduated from the University of Kansas School of Medicine in 1975, and her initial specialty was in emergency medicine.
And before Michael Farrar, there was another marriage.
Yes, a first marriage to an engineer, Debora Green, which lasted from 1974 to 1978. That divorce was, by all accounts, amicable. Yes, they cited basic incompatibility, a lack of common interests. It seems that partnership ended without any of the explosive conflict that would, later come to define her life.
So then she meets Michael Farrar. This was during her separation from Debora. They married in May of 1979.
And the sources note that Farrar was initially captivated by her intellect, her energy, but he also became aware of a deeply problematic aspect of her personality almost immediately.
That was what?
An alarming habit of losing her temper explosively over what he perceived as minor slights. Green, on her end, apparently saw Farrar as this much-needed, stable, dependable anchor in her life.
And they were both very ambitious.
Extremely. They moved to Ohio for Farrar's internal medicine residency. Green, who was dissatisfied with emergency medicine, she eventually pursued a second residency herself, specializing in hematology and oncology.
So for a time, they really were that medical power couple building these highly specialized careers.
They were, and the family grew. Timothy was born in 1982, then Kate in 1984, and finally Kelly in 1988.
But this period of, professional success on the outside seems to coincide with a pretty severe personal downturn for Green.
It does. She began to face these chronic health issues. The sources mention painful cerebellar migraines, persistent insomnia, and an infected wrist that required surgery.
And this is where things start to unravel.
This is where the professional mask really started to slip. The sources indicate that she began self-medicating, and heavily, with sedatives and narcotics to manage the pain and the stress.
And Farrar, as a physician himself, he must have noticed.
He did. He was aware of her medical background, of course, but he was also concerned by her demeanor. He described her having slurred speech, shaky handwriting, a generally sluggish disposition.
So he confronted her?
Multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
He suspected drug intoxication, and the sources say that each time he confronted her, she would promise to stop, but the pattern would just inevitably resume.
And what was happening with her career at this point?
Well, around 1992, after her third maternity leave for Kelly, her private practice in hematology and oncology just sort of faltered.
So she stopped practicing.
She effectively gave up full-time clinical practice. She moved into part-time work from home, doing medical peer reviews and some Medicaid processing. The professional veneer was definitely thinning.
What did her colleagues think?
Colleagues from that time recalled her as being distant and cold toward her patients and obsessively focused on Farrar.
The sources paint a pretty stark picture of the marriage itself.
Oh, it's a marriage defined by chronic conflict, not intimacy. Farrar later admitted that neither of them had ever truly expressed love to the other, not even early in the relationship.
And when she was faced with stress or conflict?
A profound lack of adult emotional regulation. Her rages weren't just verbal. She would harm herself, or she would deliberately break objects, whether they were in public or in private. It didn't matter.
And Farrar's way of coping with this was, what? Avoidance.
Avoidance, which only made the problem worse. He worked increasingly long hours, staying away from home, partly because of the chaos and partly because of his perceived failure to, measure up to Green's domestic standards.
And this is where the marital conflict spills over onto the children, which is just devastating.
It's disastrous. The sources allege that Green began using the children as sort of small confidants and weapons against Farrar. She would detail his flaws and his shortcomings to them.
So she's actively undermining his authority as a father.
Completely. And the children, especially Timothy, who was entering adolescence, they began to internalize Green's resentment.
And this led to conflict between father and son.
It led to Timothy actively resenting and disobeying his father, and it got bad. The sources describe serious physical altercations between 13-year-old Timothy and his own father.
Just that detail alone speaks volumes about the level of pathological dysfunction those children were forced to navigate.
It's just devastating to think of them caught in the middle of all that. The emotional landscape of that house must have been completely toxic.
So this slow collapse, it really accelerates into a full-blown crisis in early 1994.
That's right. In January, Farrar asks Green for a divorce for the first time.
And her reaction?
Explosive. Shouting, throwing things. The sources say she was surprised, even though she apparently believed Farrar was having affairs.
They separated for a bit, but then they tried to reconcile.
They did. They even agreed to buy this massive 6-bedroom home in Prairie Village, Kansas. The hope was that a larger, more structured environment might solve their emotional and organizational issues.
But the problems were, of course, deeper than just needing more space.
Much deeper. Farrar backed out of that initial home purchase because he was getting more and more concerned about their debt and, the ongoing marital instability.
And then something else happens.
Right after that deal collapsed, their current home in Missouri caught fire.
A fire.
Yes, though the source material is clear that insurance investigators determined this first fire was caused by an electrical short in a power cord, it was ruled accidental.
So they moved into an apartment, and then they actually went back to the Prairie Village house idea.
They did. They renegotiated the purchase, still hoping that a fresh start would help. But the sources confirmed that any improvements were very short-lived.
Back to the old habits.
Exactly. By the end of 1994, they had reverted to their detrimental patterns. And Farrar, at this point, is completely desperate. He resolves to wait until after a trip to Peru in June of 1995 to bring up divorce again.
And that trip to Peru is significant.
It's very significant because it was during that trip that Farrar met Margaret Hacker. She was a registered nurse whose children attended the same private school as his own.
And they were both in unhappy marriages.
They were. They began an affair almost immediately after they got back from Peru, which really set the stage for the final confrontation.
So in late July 1995, Farrar delivers the ultimatum again. He formally asks Green for a divorce.
And this time, her reaction isn't just physical, it's performative. She breaks down hysterically. She immediately informs the children that their father is leaving them.
And one source notes a particularly strange detail about her distress.
It's very telling. Her particular distress was that a broken home might disqualify the children from specific society social events. It really underscores this preoccupation she had with external appearance and status.
And here is where the narrative takes its absolute darkest turn.
This is it. The terrifying progression of Farrar's mysterious illness began almost immediately after he asked for the divorce.
He started suffering from this violent, debilitating sickness.
Extreme nausea, persistent vomiting, severe diarrhea. At first, he just dismissed it. He attributed it to traveler's diarrhea from the Peru trip.
But this was not some minor stomach bug.
Not at all. It became life-threatening. He relapsed violently and was rushed to the hospital on August 18th with severe dehydration and a high fever.
And it got worse in the hospital.
The infection led to sepsis. It was a massive, life-threatening infection caused by Streptococcus viridans bacteria leaking through his critically damaged digestive tissue and entering his bloodstream.
And the doctors were baffled.
Utterly baffled, they could not locate the root cause of the initial gastrointestinal destruction.
And then this recurring pattern emerges, which, in hindsight, is the smoking gun.
It is. Despite recovering and being discharged on August 25th, Farrar relapsed that very night.
After eating what?
After eating food that Debora Green had prepared for him. He suffered vomiting and diarrhea so severe he required immediate rehospitalization. And then, a third bout struck him just days after his second release.
The medical community must have been completely confused.
They were. His symptoms didn't neatly align with common tropical diseases like typhoid fever or sprue, or even known digestive disorders. They suspected some kind of infectious agent from his travel, but they couldn't confirm it because the symptoms kept coming back when he was at home.
And Farrar himself starts to notice this bizarre connection.
He does. He falls ill almost instantly after coming home from the sterile environment of the hospital and eating meals prepared by Green. Yet, he initially attributed it to stress or anxiety.
It's an unthinkable thing to suspect of your spouse.
It is. It wasn't until his girlfriend, Margaret Hacker, who was a nurse herself, suggested the unthinkable. Poisoning. And Farrar reportedly, he just scoffed at the idea at first.
And while Farrar's body is fighting this off, Green's mental state is spiraling.
Completely out of control, she was drinking heavily, often until she passed out, and she began talking openly about suicide.
In late September, Farrar's suspicion finally leads him to take action.
He does. Concerned for his safety and for his children's safety, he searches her purse.
And what he found was the critical turning point.
He found seed packets, clearly labeled castor beans, a suspicious anonymous letter urging him not to divorce Green, and several empty potassium chloride vials.
Castor beans. As a physician, he would have known exactly what that meant.
Instantly. The discovery of the castor beans was profound. Farrar recognized that castor beans are the natural source of ricin, one of the most lethal biological toxins known to man.
And how does ricin work?
It works by inhibiting protein synthesis within the body's cells. This leads to cell death and ultimately massive organ failure. It is incredibly potent.
And the symptoms?
The symptoms, severe GI distress, vomiting, diarrhea, they perfectly mirrored the inexplicable illness Farrar had been suffering for months.
So the next day, he confronts her.
He does. He confronts her about the seeds. Her initial explanation was bizarre. She claimed she was going to plant them.
And then she changed her story.
Immediately. She then stated she intended to use them to commit suicide, a claim that was contradicted by the massive quantities she had purchased.
Given her state, Farrar takes the next step.
Yes, given her extreme erratic behavior and obvious intoxication, he contacted the police to have her placed in psychiatric care. When the officers arrived, they found her behavior to be bizarre.
And she denied being suicidal at first.
She did during the initial interviews, But the sources note this dramatic shift once Farrar appeared at the hospital.
What happened?
She spat at him, she hurled obscenities, and then she made this chilling declaration. She said, "You're going to get these kids over our dead bodies."
That quote. Given what happened just a month later, it's just impossible to overlook.
It's horrifying. She was committed voluntarily, and she received a diagnosis of major bipolar depression with suicidal impulses.
And after 4 days, she was released.
Yes, after 4 days at the Menninger Clinic, prescribed a cocktail of heavy medications, including Prozac, she was released.
And Farrar, at this point, he's convinced.
He is now fully convinced he had been systematically poisoned. He moved out of the house the moment she returned.
And this brings us to that terrifying climax she had foreshadowed. The night of the fire, October 24, 1995.
The evening was marked by these escalating angry phone calls between Green and Farrar.
What were they about?
Farrar called Green, and he was primarily driven by his concerns about her continued heavy drinking, especially while she was alone supervising their children. The sources note the confrontation just quickly turned toxic.
And Farrar finally told her what he knew.
He did. He dropped the truth he had been sitting on. He told Green flat out that he knew she had poisoned him, and then he threatened to call social services if she didn't get her life in order immediately.
The confrontation ends, and then what?
Shortly after, at 12:20 in the morning, a hang-up 911 call is placed from the family's Prairie Village home. It alerts the authorities to potential trouble.
And a police cruiser confirmed it.
Yes, the house was fully engulfed in flames. Firefighters arrived just a few minutes later at 12:27 a.m. to what was immediately classified as a 2-alarm fire, a major blaze.
And when the first responders got there, they found Green and her 10-year-old daughter, Kate, outside.
Yes, in their nightclothes. And the contrast between them was immediate and stark.
How so?
Kate was reported to be very frantic. She was desperately begging the firefighters to save her siblings. Green, on the other hand, was described by multiple firefighters as very calm, very cool.
Kate's account of how she escaped is, well, it's crucial for understanding those final moments.
It is. She testified that she woke up to thick smoke, she called out for her brother Timothy, and then she placed that hang-up 911 call.
And she couldn't get out the normal way.
No, she found the main stairway was completely blocked by smoke and fire. So she escaped through her second-floor bedroom window, got onto the garage roof, and then jumped safely to the ground.
Just an incredible act of survival for a 10-year-old. Now, you compare that resourceful, panicked reaction to Green's story.
It's a night and day difference. Green told the police she was awakened by the alarm, she checked the panel, and then she exited through a deck that was connected to her first-floor bedroom.
So she was safe outside.
She was safely outside. And while she was standing there, she claimed she heard Timothy, her 13-year-old son, on the home's intercom system. He was asking what he should do.
And this is the most chilling statement in the entire source material.
It is. Green told the police that she instructed her trapped 13-year-old son to stay in the house and wait for rescue.
It just flies in the face of every single parental instinct imaginable.
Everyone. Telling your child to stay inside a raging fire.
Given the intensity and knowing the main exit was blocked, that instruction is almost certainly what sealed his fate.
The investigators certainly noted it as a massive red flag. The house was nearly a total loss.
And the children.
Timothy and Kelly were found the next morning after the fire had cooled enough for entry. Kelly died in her bed from smoke inhalation. Timothy's body was recovered near the ground floor kitchen, but investigators believe he likely died upstairs near his bedroom and then fell through the burned-out floor structure.
And Green's emotional response immediately after the fire was just as disturbing.
The detectives who interviewed her noted she was talkative, even cheerful. She showed no outward signs of having cried at all.
And when she was finally told that the deaths were confirmed.
This was hours later, at 5:30 in the morning. Her reaction wasn't grief, it was explosive anger, and it was directed at the police.
She attacked them verbally.
She did, calling them pathetic and demanding to be the one to tell Farrar that the babies are dead.
A request they denied.
Understandably, yes. The sources note that when she was finally released from questioning, her divorce lawyer found her profoundly distraught, but in a very strange way. She was repeatedly asking if her children were dead and then chanting rhythmically about their deaths. It suggests a complete dissociation or, a mental break.
The combination of the suspicious deaths and Farrar's poisoning claims immediately triggered a very rigorous forensic investigation.
Yes, led by the Eastern Kansas Multi-Agency Task Force. Their absolute first priority was to definitively determine the origin and cause of that fire.
And they quickly ruled out accidental causes.
Very quickly, they focused instead on the physical evidence of arson, and they found it. They discovered expensive pour patterns of a flammable liquid throughout the ground floor and significantly on the second floor as well.
So these patterns, they didn't suggest a single accidental ignition point.
Not at all. They showed deliberate spreading of an accelerant. It was applied in a calculated way to maximize the destruction and, critically, to minimize any chance of escape.
They blocked the exit.
The pour patterns covered vast areas of the ground floor, and most critically, they blocked the primary escape route, the main stairway leading down from the children's second-floor rooms.
The volume used was, what, astounding.
Astounding. They estimated somewhere between 3 and 10 U.S. gallons of liquid accelerant was used. A massive amount.
And these pour patterns were also meticulous in another way. They revealed the perpetrator's location.
They did. The trail of accelerant abruptly stopped right at the door of the master bedroom.
Which means?
Investigators determined that the master bedroom door had to have been open while the fire was being set or while it was burning.
Which directly contradicted Green's testimony.
Completely. She had claimed she only opened her door briefly to see the smoke before she escaped out the back. This suggested she was setting the fires from within or, immediately outside, her own room.
And they found physical evidence on her, too.
Crucial physical evidence. Investigators collected hair samples from both Green and Farrar. Farrar's samples were clean, no singeing. Green's hair, however, showed significant singeing.
Meaning she had been very close to the flames.
Exactly. And the sources also detailed that Green had cut her hair twice between the night of the fire and the police collecting the samples.
Which strongly suggests an attempt to remove that physical evidence.
It does. Meanwhile, the poisoning case was also gathering momentum. Police traced the unusual purchase of those castor beans back to an Olith Earl May garden store.
And a clerk there remembered the sale.
A store clerk tentatively identified Debora Green in a photo lineup. The clerk recalled a specific, very unusual order in late September for 10 packets of the out-of-season castor bean seeds.
And she gave a flimsy excuse.
A casual but false explanation. She claimed she needed them for schoolwork. Register tapes confirmed the purchase date, which aligned perfectly with the period just after Farrar's second hospitalization.
But the ultimate medical confirmation, the final piece of that puzzle, came from Farrar's own body.
It did. Before he underwent major surgery in November 1995 to repair an aneurysm, which his doctors believed was a complication stemming from the poisoning, he submitted blood samples for specialized analysis.
And the FBI found what they were looking for.
An FBI criminologist, one specializing in biological agents, provided definitive, overwhelming testimony. They confirmed the presence of large amounts of ricin antibodies in Farrar's bloodstream.
And that's a critical finding. Why?
Because antibodies are produced by the immune system specifically in response to a foreign substance. It confirms that ricin had repeatedly entered his body over a period of time, triggering an immune response.
So this wasn't just a single sudden dose of poison.
No, this was systemic chronic exposure. It was likely administered in repeated small doses over months.
The medical mystery of Michael Farrar's symptoms was officially solved.
Solved by forensic science, confirming a premeditated ricin plot.
So, with the forensic evidence locking Green into both the arson and the poisoning, the authorities finally moved to arrest her.
They did. On November 26, 1995, Green was arrested without warning. They did it while she was dropping off her surviving daughter, Kate, for ballet practice.
A discreet time to do it.
Authorities chose that timing specifically because of Green's documented, unpredictable, and explosive behavior. They wanted to avoid a public scene.
And the charges were just devastating.
2 counts of capital murder for Timothy and Kelly, 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder for Farrar and Kate, and aggravated arson. Bail was set at $3 million.
Which was a record for the county.
The highest ever in Johnson County, Kansas at the time.
Then came the show cause hearing in January 1996. This is basically a preliminary trial.
Right, to establish probable cause. And the defense mounted a desperate strategy. They attempted to deflect all the blame onto 13-year-old Timothy.
They tried to paint him as the true perpetrator.
They did. They argued he had a dangerous fascination with fire. They called friends and neighbors who testified that Timothy knew how to create small explosives and had previously been caught setting small fires in the grass.
And they tried to pin the poisoning on him, too.
Yes, claiming the teen, who apparently sometimes cooked for the family, wanted his father dead and had somehow orchestrated the ricin poisoning.
A former nanny even testified to this.
She did. She added a layer to this defense, testifying that Timothy had indeed spoken years earlier about wanting his father dead and wanting to burn down the house, though she did admit under questioning she had never reported these threats to anyone.
And Farrar himself had to testify about his relationship with his son.
He did, confirming the severe adversarial nature of their relationship, even admitting that they sometimes came to blows. It must have been an incredibly painful testimony to give.
But the state's evidence, it was just rooted in impartial science. It was overwhelming.
Completely overwhelming. State witnesses meticulously tracked Green's instability. They detailed the discovery and identification of the castor beans, and they produced the store clerk who identified Green as the purchaser.
The woman who used the schoolwork excuse.
Exactly. But the most damaging evidence, of course, was the medical confirmation.
The ricin antibodies.
The FBI criminologist testified that the sheer quantity of ricin antibodies in Farrar's blood provided unequivocal proof of repeated exposure over time.
And the arson investigators backed this up with all the physical evidence.
The unconnected fires, the vast amounts of accelerant, the poor patterns that blocked the exit, and the crucial fact that the master bedroom door had to have been open when the fire began.
And they also played the video of her post-fire interview for the judge.
They did, allowing the judge to observe her disturbing, cheerful demeanor and, critically, to hear her own admission that she instructed her trapped 13-year-old son to stay inside the burning house.
So the judge found probable cause.
Probable cause was shown for all 5 charges, and given the nature of the crime, multiple victims in an act of premeditated violence, the prosecutors formally announced they would seek the death penalty.
And facing capital punishment, Green's own defense team, they conducted their own investigation.
And this investigation, ironically, it became the final nail in her defense's coffin.
Why?
Because it independently verified the strength of the state's forensic findings. Her own team's experts confirmed the state's conclusions.
And they found something else.
They found a burned robe belonging to Green on the master bathroom floor, and it was burned in a pattern that strongly indicated she had been wearing it while setting a fire.
When she was confronted with this, with irrefutable physical evidence verified by her own team,
she finally admitted to her divorce lawyer, Ellen Ryan, that she had set the fire.
but she claimed she couldn't remember it clearly.
Right. She claimed a lack of clear memory regarding the specific act, and she rigidly maintained even then that Timothy had been the one who poisoned Farrar.
So in April 1996, to avoid the death penalty, she agreed to a plea deal.
She did. She entered an Alford plea to all 5 charges.
And just for the listener, an Alford plea is a specific legal mechanism.
Yes, it means the defendant does not explicitly admit guilt, but they do acknowledge that the prosecution has enough evidence to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt of their guilt. It allows them to accept a conviction and sentencing without a full confession.
She was sentenced on May 30, 1996.
She was. And during the sentencing, Green read a prepared statement to the court. She accepted responsibility for the tragedy and acknowledged the state possessed substantial evidence linking her to her children's deaths.
And she said she hoped ending the legal process would help her family heal.
Yes, specifically mentioning her surviving daughter, Kate, hoping she could begin the healing process. She was then formally sentenced to 2 concurrent 40-year prison sentences.
And her defense counsel later remarked something that, well, it stands in stark contrast to the evidence.
They did. They said that while she was accepting responsibility, they didn't believe she ever intended to kill her children. A statement that is very difficult to reconcile with the premeditated nature of an arson that physically blocked their only escape route.
So following the conviction, the crucial question became, why? Why did this happen?
Right. Understanding Green's motivations required deep psychological insight, and the sources reveal a very complex and often contradictory picture.
Even after she was sentenced, Green continued to promote these conflicting stories.
She did. She wrote letters claiming her memory of the fire was limited because she had taken excessive doses of her medication. She floated new accusations, even claiming that Farrar's girlfriend, Margaret Hacker, was the actual arsonist.
All while still blaming Timothy for the poisoning.
All while rigidly maintaining that Timothy was the poisoner. She even wrote to the author Anne Rule, blaming her cloudy thinking during the hearings on her Prozac prescription, asserting that her mind only became crystal clear once she was off the drug in prison.
Let's look at the psychological evaluation that was performed for her defense.
Yes, by Dr. Marilyn Hutchinson. It offers one perspective. Dr. Hutchinson found Green to be cognitively competent. Her intellect was still intact, but she fundamentally described her as emotionally limited and immature. She argued Green possessed the emotional capabilities of a very young child.
And Green herself seemed to confirm this emotional distance?
She did during her evaluation. She told Hutchinson that she would consciously tune out or dissociate herself to avoid excessive emotional input. Her answers were often monosyllabic and very detached.
So what was Hutchinson's formal diagnosis?
Schizoid personality disorder. And it's important to understand what that means. The diagnosis is characterized by extreme emotional detachment, a profound disinterest in social relationships, and a real difficulty in expressing emotion.
So how did she function as a doctor, as a mother, for so long?
Well, Hutchinson theorized that Green's formidable intellect normally allowed her to compensate for these deep emotional deficits in her professional and daily life. But the intense stressors, the impending divorce, the exposure of her drug use, the conflict with Timothy, it all just overwhelmed her capacity to compensate.
And that led to the catastrophic breakdown.
It did. Hutchinson specifically testified that Green did not meet the criteria for sociopathy.
But the clinical analysis doesn't end there. This is where the picture gets really complicated, because other experts offered starkly contrasting opinions.
They did. Psychiatrist Michael H. Stone, using secondary sources, suggested a combination of traits. He pointed to psychopathy, borderline personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder.
Let's break those down. Narcissistic personality disorder.
It's characterized by an excessive need for admiration, a huge sense of entitlement, and a profound lack of empathy. People with NPD often react to criticism or failure with intense rage.
And borderline personality disorder.
That, by contrast, involves extreme instability in mood, behavior, and relationships. It often manifests in explosive, chaotic emotion.
So this raises a really important question. If Hutchinson diagnoses schizoid PD, which is emotional flatness and detachment, how do we reconcile that with the documented, explosive, rage-filled, chaotic behavior that Stone notes in borderline or narcissistic traits?
That paradox is exactly what makes Debora Green such a challenging case study.
You have two completely opposite presentations.
You do. And criminology authors have pointed out the fundamental difficulty in diagnosing her because her actions were so contradictory. You have highly impulsive, chaotic acts, the explosive rages, the final act of arson and child murder, right alongside months of cold, meticulous, highly premeditated acts.
The ricin plot.
Exactly, the ricin poisoning plot against Farrar. That combination of high planning on one hand and high impulsivity on the other doesn't fit neatly into any single diagnosis.
So what's a potential theory to bridge that gap?
Well, one could speculate that the emotional flatness of a schizoid personality allowed her to detach from the consequences of her actions, while a narcissistic core drove the motivation. The systematic violence was an attempt to preserve her fragile ego after Farrar rejected her, preventing him from moving on with another woman.
And that theory was strongly supported by true crime author Ann Rule.
It was. She corresponded with Green directly, and Rule concluded that the core driver was hatred for Farrar and this desperate need to retain control. Destroying the entire family unit was the ultimate, albeit tragic, way to ensure that he could not simply take the children and leave her behind. It preserved her twisted sense of self.
Finally, we should note the clinical specificity of the poisoning itself.
Yes, the sources include the Green case in a 2002 working paper on bioterrorism.
Not because she was a terrorist.
Not at all. But because the crime involved the illicit, calculated, and technical deployment of a biological toxin ricin derived from castor beans in a domestic setting, it underscores that this aspect of her crime wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a scientifically premeditated attempt to kill.
Reviewing the entirety of this material, you're just left with these truly astonishing details. This was a highly intelligent, academically brilliant physician who deliberately sourced a lethal toxin from easily available materials.
And she demonstrated calculation and technical expertise in doing so. Then she used a staggering amount of liquid accelerant, up to 10 gallons, to systematically burn down her own family home,
ultimately killing her two youngest children in the process.
It's just a jarring study in extremes. The material shows this profound disconnect between her professional competence and the extreme emotional and psychological deficits that were identified by multiple experts.
Whether you categorize it as schizoid, narcissistic, or borderline.
It doesn't really matter. The case tragically illustrates how fundamental personal stressors, when they're encountered by someone with these deeply entrenched coping limitations, can completely overwhelm even a high intellectual capacity and all moral constraints.
And it leads to months of systematic violence in a domestic setting.
We have to remember the true victims here, Timothy and Kelly. Their lives were ended in a horrific manner, fueled by an adult's extreme inability to cope with the reality of a divorce.
And we also have to pause and acknowledge the enduring suffering of her surviving daughter, Kate.
She was forced to escape those flames, and she now has to carry the devastating knowledge of her mother's actions for the rest of her life.
Absolutely. The enduring message, I think, from the source material is the necessity and the power of forensic science. We explored how the physical evidence just became the undeniable narrative. It overrode Green's shifting stories and her claims of amnesia.
Investigators pieced together the hidden story of intent through all those tiny details. The singed hair, the precise pore patterns stopping at her bedroom door, the clerk's identification confirming the castor bean purchase.
And, of course, the medical confirmation of rice and antibodies in Farrar's blood.
That impartial data, all derived from critical forensic science, allowed them to piece together a narrative of intent that spanned months, and it led to a guilty finding even without a full confession.
It really raises a compelling consideration for you, the listener. When a crime is so meticulously covered up, and the perpetrator actively denies all knowledge of it, what does the success of this investigation reveal about the necessity of utilizing every single facet of forensic science to uncover the calculated truth that can hide behind domestic crimes?
Thank you for joining us for this in-depth exploration of the sources.
Thanks for listening.